Funchal, Madeira. The 1st of April 1922. A villa called Quinta do Monte sits high in the mountains above the harbour, a summer house never intended for winter. The walls are damp. There is no central heating. In a narrow bedroom on the second floor, a man of 34 lies on an iron bed, fighting for each breath. He has been coughing for 3 weeks. His lungs are filled with fluid. His wife kneels beside him, holding a crucifix to his lips. In the next room, 7 children wait. The eldest is 9. The youngest is 2. Their mother is pregnant with the 8th. The man on the bed is Karl Habsburg, former Emperor of Austria, former King of Hungary, King of Bohemia, King of Croatia, King of Galicia and Lodomeria. Apostolic King, a title granted to his family by the papacy itself. 3 years earlier, he ruled 60 million people across a territory of 676,000 square kilometres, from the Alps to the Carpathians, from the Adriatic to the Polish steppe. He commanded an army of 8 million men. The imperial treasury held the crown of St. Stephen, the Iron Crown of Lombardy, the Habsburg crown jewels accumulated over 6 centuries of unbroken rule. Now the treasury belongs to successor states that did not exist 5 years ago. The jewels have been sold to finance 2 failed attempts to reclaim the Hungarian throne. The promised annual stipend of £20,000 from those successor states was never paid. The family arrived on this island 4 months ago aboard the British cruiser HMS Cardiff under armed escort, carrying what they could pack in hours. Karl's breathing slows. He looks at the crucifix. He looks at Zita. His last words to her, "I love you infinitely. In the heart of Jesus, we will see each other again." Then, gazing at the crucifix, "Thy will be done. Yes, yes, as you will, Jesus." He died at 12:23 in the afternoon. He is 34 years old. He's been emperor for 2 years and exile for 3. 10 weeks earlier, on the 22nd of January, Pope Benedict XV died in Rome. He was the pope who had privately urged Karl to return to Hungary and reclaim his crown. He was the pope who called the war that destroyed Karl's empire the suicide of civilized Europe. He was the pope who sent a 7-point peace note in 1917 that implicitly favoured Habsburg survival and watched every belligerent except Austria-Hungary reject it. Benedict's encouragement had helped send Karl on the restoration attempts that cost him his remaining fortune and landed him on this island. The Pope died in the Apostolic Palace. The emperor he encouraged died in a summer house with no heat. The Vatican was already turning the page. Within 7 years, it would sign a treaty with Mussolini. Within 11, a concordat with Hitler. Within 18, a concordat with Salazar. Within 31, a concordat with Franco. 4 agreements with 4 regimes built on the rubble of the old Catholic monarchies. The Habsburgs, the Savoys, the Braganzas, the Bourbons. The institution that had blessed these crowns for centuries would make its peace with the men who buried them, and it would do so using the same instrument every time: the concordat, a contract, a signature, a transfer of loyalty dressed in Latin and witnessed by cardinals. Karl Habsburg was the last Catholic emperor in European history. The church that anointed him could not save him. The question is whether it tried and what it did instead. 5 crowns, 5 alliances spanning centuries, 5 collapses, 5 concordats with the replacement regime. The Bourbons of France held the title Most Christian King. Their Pope wept at Louis XVI's execution, declared him a royal martyr, then died a prisoner of the French Republic. His successor travelled to Paris and anointed Napoleon. The Habsburgs held the title Apostolic King. Their Pope privately urged Emperor Karl to reclaim his throne. Karl failed, lost everything, and died on Madeira. The Vatican signed concordats with the dictatorships that rose from Habsburg rubble. The House of Savoy conquered the Vatican's own kingdom, seized Rome, stripped the Pope of his temporal sovereignty, and turned the papacy into a self-declared prisoner for 59 years. The Vatican's revenge was patient. It waited until Mussolini offered better terms than the Savoy monarchy ever had, signed the Lateran Treaty, and watched the monarchy fall 17 years later without lifting a finger. The Braganzas of Portugal held the title Most Faithful King. Their republic expelled every religious order, nationalised every church, and predicted the eradication of Catholicism within 3 generations. The Vatican protested, then signed a concordat with the dictator who replaced the republic, transferring the historic royal right of church patronage from an extinct monarchy to a general. The Spanish Bourbons held the title Most Catholic King, the sacred right to appoint bishops, a privilege fought over for 4 centuries, passed from the crown to Francisco Franco under the Concordat of 1953. A cardinal called it the most perfect concordat in the entire history of the Church. The pattern is not hidden. It is documented, dated, and signed. The Vatican's loyalty to monarchies lasted exactly as long as monarchies were useful, and not one day longer. The architecture of this alliance was built on mutual dependence, and it was old. By the 16th century, the relationship between Rome and the Catholic crowns of Europe had been formalised through a system of papal titles, concordats, and shared revenue that bound church and throne into a single governing structure. The French king held the title Rex Christianissimus, Most Christian King, formalised since the late 15th century. Under the Concordat of Bologna, signed in 1516 between Pope Leo X and Francis I, the French crown nominated all bishops and abbots in France. The Pope confirmed them and collected the annates, the first year's revenue from each new appointment. The Gallican Church owned approximately 6% of all French land, collected an estimated 230 million livres per year in rents and tithes, and was exempt from direct taxation. It was the wealthiest church in Christendom, and the Bourbons were its protectors. The Habsburg Emperor held the title Apostolic King of Hungary, formally granted by Pope Clement XIII to Empress Maria Theresa on the 19th of August, 1758. The title recognised 5 centuries of service. The Habsburgs had led the Catholic forces at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, waged the Counter-Reformation across Central Europe, and withstood 2 Ottoman sieges of Vienna. The alliance between Rome and Vienna was the longest-running political partnership in European history. The Portuguese king held the title Rex Fidelissimus, Most Faithful King, granted by Pope Benedict XIV to King João V in 1748, in recognition of Portugal's missionary empire and the extraordinary wealth João had poured into Rome, including funding the Church of São Roque, one of the most expensive chapels ever built. The Spanish king held the title Rex Catholicissimus, Most Catholic Majesty, conferred by Pope Alexander VI in 1494 after the completion of the Reconquista. The Concordat of 1851 declared Catholicism the only religion of Spain to the exclusion of all other religions. These were not ceremonial gestures. Each title carried specific legal rights, the power to nominate bishops, to collect church revenues, to wage wars with papal blessing. In return, the Vatican received military protection, enforcement of its spiritual authority across entire continents, and a share of the wealth generated by Catholic empires spanning the globe. The altar needed the throne. The throne needed the altar. Neither could function without the other. What the Vatican understood, and what the monarchies did not, was that the altar could find a new throne. The throne could not find a new God. The first and defining case was France. The pattern that would repeat across every Catholic monarchy for the next 2 centuries was established here, in a sequence that began with a pope weeping for a king and ended with a different pope crowning the king's executioner. On the 2nd of November 1789, the National Assembly declared all church property in France nationalised. The estimated value, 3 billion livres. On the 12th of July 1790, the civil constitution of the clergy reduced French dioceses from 130 to 83, made clergy elected state employees and demanded an oath of loyalty to the nation. Only 7 of 135 bishops swore the oath. Pope Pius VI broke his silence on the 10th of March 1791 with a papal brief Quod Aliquantum. He condemned the civil constitution and called the Declaration of the Rights of Man a system that amounted to disturbing and upending the very sacred dogmas and most secure discipline of the Church. A month later, in Charitas, he gave all oath-taking clergy 40 days to recant or face suspension. Diplomatic relations between France and the Holy See were severed by May of 1791. Louis XVI was executed at 10:22 on the morning of the 21st of January, 1793, at the Place de la Révolution. General Santerre ordered a drum roll to drown out his final words. Those who stood close enough heard them. "I die innocent of all the crimes laid to my charge. I pardon those who have caused my death. And I pray to God that the blood you are about to shed may never be visited on France." Pius VI responded with the allocation of quaer lacrimae on the 17th of June, 1793. It remains one of the most emotionally raw papal documents ever issued. Why should tears and sobs not choke off our words? By a conspiracy of impious men, the most Christian king, Louis XVI, has been condemned to death. He declared Louis a royal martyr, arguing the king had been killed in odium fidei, out of hatred for the faith. Then the revolution consumed the Vatican itself. Napoleon's Treaty of Tolentino, signed on the 19th of February 1797, stripped the papacy of 36 million livres, the territories of Avignon, Bologna, Ferrara and Romagna, and over 100 artworks including the Laocoon. On the 20th of February 1798, French troops entered Rome and dragged the 81-year-old Pope from the city. Pius VI was carried semi-conscious through Alpine snow, transferred between prison towns for 16 months, and died in Valence on the 29th of August 1799. His last words, "Lord, forgive them." The Pope who declared Louis XVI a martyr died in the custody of Louis XVI's executioners. What followed was the most consequential diplomatic pivot in Vatican history. Pius VII was elected in March of 1800. He had preached in 1797 that Christian virtue makes men good democrats. Equality is not an idea of philosophers, but of Christ. Napoleon's instructions to his negotiator were characteristic. Treat the Pope as if he had 200,000 men. The Concordat of 1801, signed at midnight on the 15th of July after 10 separate drafts, permanently transformed the Church's relationship with political power. Catholicism was downgraded from state religion to merely the religion of the great majority of the French citizens. The Pope demanded the resignation of the entire French hierarchy, both royalist and revolutionary bishops, to allow fresh appointments acceptable to Napoleon. Article 13 guaranteed that neither the Pope nor his successors would disturb in any manner those who have acquired alienated ecclesiastical possessions. 3 billion livres in confiscated church property was permanently surrendered. The revolution's greatest act of theft was ratified by the Pope himself. On the 2nd of December 1804, Pius VII travelled to Paris for Napoleon's coronation at Notre Dame. He personally anointed the usurper's head. The crown scene was pre-arranged. Napoleon placed it on his own head while the Pope sat and watched. The Pope who had declared Louis XVI a martyr killed out of hatred for the faith, now anointed the man who inherited that hatred's political machinery. When Charles X fell in the July Revolution of 1830, Pope Pius VIII recognised his replacement, Louis Philippe, without delay. One contemporary observed that papal policy did not for a moment hesitate to sacrifice the royal tool. The Bourbons had protected the Church for 275 years. The Vatican moved on in a matter of weeks. The Vatican wept for Louis XVI, then crowned Napoleon. Of all the papal pivots in this story, and there are many, which do you think cut deepest? Tell me in the comments. No dynasty served the Vatican longer or more faithfully than the Habsburgs. For over 500 years, they were Rome's sword arm, leading the Catholic fleet at Lepanto, waging the Counter-Reformation across Central Europe, withstanding 2 Ottoman sieges of Vienna, defending the faith on battlefields from the Danube to the Low Countries. The compact was sacred and specific. The Habsburgs converted nations. The papacy crowned them. When the Great War began, Pope Benedict XV, elected on the 3rd of September 1914, condemned the conflict as the suicide of civilized Europe and, in a phrase that enraged the Allied powers, called it a useless slaughter. His 7-point peace note of the 1st of August 1917 proposed negotiated territorial settlements rather than the dismemberment of empires. The note implicitly favoured Habsburg survival. Austria-Hungary was the only major power to respond favourably. Emperor Karl I replied on the 21st of September, "With a thankful heart we receive this fresh gift of fatherly care which you, Holy Father, always bestow on all peoples without distinction." Benedict's neutrality was more useful to the Vatican than Karl's gratitude was to Karl. The Pope could not openly back the Central Powers without alienating Catholic France, Belgium and Italy. The 1915 Treaty of London had secretly bound the Allies to exclude the Vatican from any future peace conference. When Austria-Hungary collapsed in November of 1918, the Vatican had no seat at the table and no leverage to prevent the dissolution. Karl signed his renunciation of governing authority at Schönbrunn Palace on the 11th of November 1918. He chose his words with precision, deliberately avoiding the term abdication. He retreated to Schloss Eckartsau, a hunting lodge in Lower Austria, where he waited through the winter as the empire was carved into successor states. On the 23rd of March 1919, as the imperial family crossed into Swiss exile at the border town of Feldkirch, Karl issued a manifesto revoking his renunciation and sent it to only 2 recipients, King Alfonso XIII of Spain and Pope Benedict XV. Multiple sources confirm that Benedict privately supported Karl's restoration. The Pope reportedly urged Karl to return to Hungary as soon as possible, to unite the different countries under his crown, and to build the fortress of the Church. French Prime Minister Briand and Benedict XV both signalled that the moment for restoration had come. Karl's first attempt came on the 24th of March 1921. He arrived in Budapest and confronted Regent Miklos Horthy, who refused to yield power. The attempt collapsed without violence. His second attempt, the 20th through the 23rd of October 1921, was more dramatic. The pregnant Empress Zita flew from Zurich to Hungary in an open biplane. Karl gathered loyalist troops and advanced toward Budapest. At Kellenfold, a suburb of the capital, a brief skirmish left several dozen killed or wounded. Horthy's forces held. The restoration was over. The Allied powers demanded permanent exile. The family was placed aboard the British cruiser HMS Cardiff on the 19th of November 1921 and transported to Madeira, an island chosen specifically because it was too remote and too poor for further political adventures. They moved into the Villa Quinta do Monte, high above Funchal. Their art and jewels had been sold to finance the restoration attempts. The £20,000 per year promised by the successor states was never delivered. Benedict XV died on the 22nd of January. 1922, Karl caught pneumonia in March. He could not afford the specialist care that might have saved him. On the 1st of April, at 12:23 in the afternoon, he died gazing at the crucifix Zita held to his lips. He was 34 years old. Empress Zita was 29. She had 7 children. She was pregnant with an 8th, Archduchess Elizabeth, born 5 months later. Zita wore black mourning dress for the remaining 67 years of her life. She became an oblate of Solesmes Abbey, spending years within its enclosure. She never remarried. She died on the 14th of March 1989 at 96. She had been an empress for 2 years and a widow for 67. The Vatican did not forget the Habsburgs. It simply changed the terms of the relationship. Within 7 years of Karl's death, it signed the Lateran Treaty with Mussolini. Within 11 years, the Reichskonkordat with Hitler. Within 11 years, a concordat with the Austrian dictatorship of Engelbert Dollfuss. 3 agreements with 3 regimes built on Habsburg ruins, none of which required a Habsburg. If you're finding value in this, subscribing is the best way to support the channel. It's free and it helps us keep going. Every case in this story follows the same arc: alliance, collapse, concordat. But the House of Savoy inverts it entirely. Here, the monarchy destroyed the Vatican, and the Vatican's response shaped its attitude toward every political system for the next century. On the 20th of September 1870, General Raffaele Cadorna's 50,000 Italian troops breached the Aurelian walls near Porta Pia after a 3-hour cannonade beginning at 5:15 in the morning. Defending Rome were 13,157 papal soldiers under General Hermann Kanzler, Swiss guards, papal zouaves and Catholic volunteers from across Europe. Pius IX had ordered resistance sufficient to prove the takeover was involuntary, then surrender. A white flag was hoisted from St. Peter's Dome at approximately 9:50 in the morning. 49 Italian soldiers and 19 papal troops died. The 1,000-year temporal sovereignty of the popes was over. Pius IX's response to Victor Emmanuel II's envoy was recorded. "Fine loyalty, you are all a set of vipers, of white sepulchres and wanting in faith." He had already excommunicated the king in 1860. Now he withdrew into the Vatican, declared himself a prisoner, and refused to leave. He would not step into St. Peter's Square. He lived in a palace of 11,000 rooms, but used only 2, a bare stone floor, an iron bedstead, a hard mattress, a prie-dieu, and little else. Italy's law of guarantees, passed on the 13th of May 1871, offered the Pope sovereign honours, an annual grant of 3,225,000 lire, and use of the Vatican and Lateran palaces. Pius IX rejected it as a unilateral domestic law that could be revoked at any parliament's whim. He would not appear, he said, as a chaplain of the King of Italy. The non-expedite, first issued on the 29th of February 1868, and strengthened repeatedly through the following decades, instructed Catholics that it was not expedient to participate in Italian national politics, neither as candidates nor as voters. The formula was blunt: ne eletti, ne elettori, neither elected nor electors. This extraordinary act of political warfare kept the Catholic majority out of Parliament for decades, preventing the formation of a strong Conservative party, and paradoxically enabling the anti-clerical legislation the Vatican despised. It was gradually relaxed through the Patto Gentiloni of 1913, in which Catholic voters secretly supported 228 liberal candidates who pledged to oppose divorce and fund Catholic schools. The non-expedite was formally lifted in 1919 when Benedict XV permitted the creation of Don Luigi Sturzo's Italian People's Party. 4 popes, Pius IX, Leo XIII, Pius X, and Benedict XV maintained the prisoner stance for 59 years. The resolution came not through the monarchy but through Mussolini. The Lateran Treaty was signed on the 11th of February 1929 by Cardinal Pietro Gasparri for Pius XI and Mussolini for King Victor Emmanuel III. The 3-part agreement created Vatican City, 44 hectares, as a sovereign state, paid the Vatican 750 million lire in cash, plus 1 billion lire in government bonds, and established a concordat making Catholicism Italy's official religion with mandatory religious instruction in all schools. Pius XI hailed Mussolini as a man whom Providence has sent to us. The price of this providence was steep. The Vatican had already forced Don Luigi Sturzo to resign as head of the Popular Party in 1923 and accepted the party's dissolution in 1926. Sturzo protested that the Pope was eliminating the one party that was truly inspired by Christian principles and that served to limit the arbitrary rule of the dictatorship. His protest changed nothing. When the Italian monarchy fell in the referendum of the 2nd of June 1946, 12,718,641 votes for the Republic against 10,718,502 for the monarchy. Pope Pius XII was privately dismayed. He told American envoy Myron Taylor that it would have been far preferable for Italy to remain a monarchy, but noted that what was done was done. King Umberto II departed for Cascais, Portugal, on the 12th of June. The Lateran Accords transferred seamlessly to the new republic. The House of Savoy taught the Vatican the lesson it would never forget. No political system could be trusted, and the only safe strategy was permanent institutional flexibility. Pius XI stated the doctrine explicitly: the Catholic Church is never bound to one form of government more than to another, provided the divine rights of God and of Christian consciences are safe. That sentence is the key to everything. Portugal held the title Rex Fidelissimus, Most Faithful King. On the 1st of February 1908, King Carlos I was assassinated alongside Crown Prince Luís Filipe in Lisbon's Terreiro do Paço. Carlos had signed emergency decrees 2 days earlier, telling his ministers, "I sign my sentence of death, but you gentlemen want it that way." 2 gunmen opened fire on the royal carriage. Carlos was killed instantly. Luís Filipe died 20 minutes later. The 18-year-old Prince Manuel survived with a wound to his arm and became King Manuel II. The Portuguese Republic was proclaimed on the 5th of October 1910 after a military uprising. Manuel II fled aboard the royal yacht Amelia to Gibraltar, then to England. Within 5 days, the new regime expelled all religious orders and confiscated their property. The Law of Separation, enacted on the 20th of April 1911, was among the most aggressive anti-clerical legislation in European history. All church property nationalised, clergy barred from forming lay religious associations, a third of voluntary alms redirected to civil assistance, and pensions offered to priests who abandoned their ministry or married. Justice Minister Afonso Costa predicted the eradication of Catholicism in the space of 3 generations. Pope Pius X's encyclical Iam Dudum issued on the 24th of May 1911, condemned the law as absurd and monstrous, and catalogued the Republic's offences in detail. But the encyclical also revealed the Vatican's instinct for institutional calculation. Pius X admitted that the Holy See had deliberately avoided any action that could even have the appearance of hostility to the Republic, for we clung to the hope that its rulers would one day take saner counsels. In this, however, we have been altogether disappointed. The Vatican had given the Republic a chance, not because it supported Republican principles, but because it hoped the Republic might eventually prove useful. The Fatima apparitions of 1917, reported between the 13th of May and the 13th of October by 3 shepherd children in central Portugal and witnessed by an estimated 50,000 to 70,000 people during the Miracle of the Sun, became a potent conservative Catholic rallying point in a country convulsed by anti-clerical politics. Scholars have documented how the cult of Fatima set the stage for the subsequent emergence of the Salazar regime, providing a spiritual framework for authoritarian Catholic corporatism. Manuel II died in exile at Twickenham, England, on the 2nd of July 1932 at age 42 from acute edema of the glottis, the day after attending Wimbledon. His body was returned to Lisbon aboard HMS Concord and received at the very square where his father and brother had been assassinated 24 years earlier. He left no children. The Braganza line continued through a cadet branch. When Salazar consolidated power, the Vatican signed the Concordat of 1940 on the 7th of May. Transferring the historic royal padroado, the right of church patronage, from the extinct Braganza monarchy to a dictator. The most faithful king's sacred privileges now belong to a professor of economics who had never worn a crown. Spain's arc ran parallel. The Bourbons held the title Rex Catholicissimos, Most Catholic Majesty, since 1494. The Concordat of 1851 declared Catholicism the sole religion of Spain to the exclusion of all others. Alfonso XIII suspended his royal prerogatives on the 14th of April 1931 after Republican candidates swept 45 of 52 provincial capitals in municipal elections. He left Spain by car that evening, crossing into France. He never formally abdicated. The Vatican's response revealed its doctrinal flexibility. Pius XI's encyclical Dilectissima Nobis, issued on the 3rd of June 1933, laid down the definitive escape clause. The Catholic Church is never bound to one form of government more than to another. The Vatican maintained diplomatic relations with the Spanish Republic. The Spanish Civil War drew the Vatican into partisan alignment more directly than anywhere else. Between 1936 and 1939, approximately 6,800 clergy were killed under Republican control. 13 bishops, 4,154 priests and seminarians, 2,365 male religious, and 283 nuns. The collective letter of the Spanish bishops, dated the 1st of July 1937, was drafted by Cardinal Isidro Goma at Franco's explicit request. It described the war as an armed plebiscite and declared, "War, though it is one of the most terrible scourges of mankind, yet sometimes it is the heroic and only remedy." 2 bishops refused to sign. Cardinal Vidal y Barraquer of Tarragona. Franco never allowed him to return to Spain. Bishop Mateo Mujica of Vitoria protested, "I possess long lists of fervent Christians and exemplary priests who have been murdered with impunity and without trial." He was referring to Basque Catholics killed by Franco's nationalist forces, the side the bishop's letter endorsed. The Concordat of 1953 gave Franco the Patronato Real, the historic right of Spanish monarchs to name bishops. Cardinal Alfredo Ottaviani called it the most perfect concordat in the entire history of the Church. The sacred privilege that Bourbon kings had fought over for 4 centuries was now exercised by a military dictator. When Pope Paul VI asked Franco to surrender this right in 1968, Franco refused, citing his moral obligation to the Spanish people. Juan Carlos I was crowned king on the 22nd of November 1975, 2 days after Franco's death. Cardinal Vicente Enrique y Tarancon delivered the homily at the solemn enthronement mass. "You take the reins of the state in an hour of transition. This will require the collaboration of everyone, the prudence of everyone, the talent and determination of everyone to make this the path of peace, progress, liberty, and mutual respect." The Vatican was endorsing democracy. It had spent 36 years endorsing dictatorship. The transition required no apology and produced none. The Concordat is the Vatican's survival instrument. It is the mechanism by which the Church transfers its loyalty from one political system to another, from king to emperor to dictator, from dictator to republic, without ever admitting that a transfer has occurred. 6 concordats across 152 years tell the story. 1801, the Concordat with Napoleon. The Bourbons abandoned. Church property permanently surrendered. The Pope crowns the usurper. 1929, the Lateran Treaty with Mussolini. The Italian Popular Party dissolved. The papacy accepted 44 hectares and 1,750,000,000 lire in exchange for 1,000 years of temporal sovereignty. 1933, the Reichskonkordat with Hitler. The German Centre Party dissolved 15 days before the signing, on the 5th of July. Cardinal Pacelli told a British diplomat, "The Holy See is not interested in the Centre Party." Hitler exulted at a cabinet meeting that the Concordat gave Germany an opportunity and created an area of trust significant in the developing struggle against international Jewry. Cardinal Faulhaber wrote to Hitler on the 24th of July. "For Germany's prestige in the East and the West and before the whole world, this handshake with the papacy, the greatest moral power in the history of the world, is a feat of immeasurable importance." 1933. The Austrian Concordat with the Dollfuss dictatorship. Parliamentary democracy dissolved. Catholic corporatism installed. 1940. The Portuguese Concordat with Salazar. The Braganza monarchy's historic padroado was transferred to a dictator. 1953, the Spanish Concordat with Franco. The Bourbon monarchy's right to appoint bishops transferred to a general. In every case involving an authoritarian regime, the Vatican accepted or facilitated the destruction of the independent Catholic political party that might have offered an alternative. The Partito Popolare in Italy dissolved. The Centre Party in Germany dissolved. Austrian parliamentary parties dissolved. The Vatican's Under-Secretary of State explained the logic to a British diplomat on the 22nd of April 1933. "The Holy See is not interested in the Centre Party. We are more concerned with the mass of Catholic voters in Germany than with the Catholic deputies who represent them in the Reichstag." Each Concordat had a financial dimension. The 1801 Concordat permanently surrendered claims to 3 billion livres in confiscated property. The 1929 Lateran Treaty yielded 1,750,000,000 lire. The 1953 Spanish Concordat provided full state financial support for clergy salaries, church construction, and tax exemptions. Each represented the Vatican choosing present institutional security over past dynastic loyalty. Confronted about the Reichskonkordat, Cardinal Pacelli, later Pope Pius XII, explained, "A pistol had been pointed at his head and he had had no alternative. The spiritual welfare of 20 million Catholic souls in Germany was at stake." Nazi violations began almost immediately. Between 1933 and 1937, the Vatican issued nearly 60 formal diplomatic protests. All were ignored. Pius XI's encyclical Mit brennender Sorge, written in German, smuggled into the country and read from every Catholic pulpit on the 21st of March, 1937, was the first major official public document to confront Nazism directly. The Reichskonkordat remains in force today. It is the only bilateral treaty from the Nazi era still valid in the Federal Republic of Germany. The philosophical key lies in a single exchange. When Napoleon threatened to destroy the church, Cardinal Ercole Consalvi, Pius VII's Secretary of State and the architect of the 1801 Concordat, replied, "Your Majesty, you would be making a useless effort. If in 1800 years we clergy have failed to destroy the church, do you really think that you'll be able to do it?" The Vatican operates on a timescale where Napoleon is a passing annoyance. Every concordat reflects this conviction. Sign with whoever holds power now because they will not hold it forever, and the church will still be here when they are gone. 3 dynasties stood at the edges of the Vatican's reach, too distant, too Protestant, or too alien for the concordat machinery to save them. The Romanovs were beyond help. The Orthodox Catholic schism of 1054 meant there was no nuncio in St. Petersburg, no concordat, no channel. When Nicholas II abdicated on the 15th of March 1917, Benedict XV saw opportunity rather than loss, believing the fall of the Tsarist system might open doors for Catholic Orthodox reunion. He established the Congregation for the Oriental Churches in 1917 and the Pontifical Oriental Institute in 1920. No documented Vatican effort to rescue the Romanov family has been found. When the imperial family was executed in the Ipatiev house at Yekaterinburg on the 17th of July 1918, Yakov Yurovsky reading the death sentence aloud before the shooting began, the Vatican had no means of response. The Bolsheviks initially claimed only Nicholas had been shot. Benedict XV raised 5 million lire for famine relief in Russia, but the dynasty was beyond saving. Grand Duchess Elizabeth Feodorovna, Alexandra's elder sister, who had sold all her jewellery to found a convent, who had visited her husband's assassin in prison and offered him forgiveness, was thrown alive into a mine shaft at Alapayevsk on the 18th of July, 1918, one day after the Yekaterinburg executions. Witnesses reported hearing hymns rising from the shaft for hours. The Hohenzollerns presented a different problem. Prussia was Protestant. Bismarck's Kulturkampf, the culture war waged between 1871 and 1887, expelled over 500 Jesuits, affected 18 Tsai, 100 priests left nearly 1,000 parishes vacant, and stripped 5 bishops of their sees. Paradoxically, the persecutions strengthened the Catholic Centre Party, which became the most formidable parliamentary opposition Bismarck faced. By 1885, Bismarck was proposing the Pope as an international arbiter and receiving the Supreme Order of Christ, the highest papal chivalric honour, never before given to a Protestant. When Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated on the 9th of November 1918, no specific Vatican statement was recorded. The Centre Party became central to Weimar coalition politics until the Vatican sacrificed it for the Reichskonkordat 15 years later. The party that had survived Bismarck's persecution was dissolved to secure a handshake with Hitler. The Ottoman dynasty's fall barely registered on the Vatican's radar as a dynastic event. Benedict XV's primary engagement with the Ottoman sphere had been the Armenian genocide. He sent a personal letter to Sultan Mehmed V pleading for mercy, which went unanswered. His apostolic delegate in Constantinople reported, In order to defend the Armenian people, I lost the favour of Caesar, the Nero of this unhappy nation. The Sultanate was abolished on the 1st of November 1922. The Caliphate followed on the 3rd of March 1924. The Vatican's post-Ottoman concern was control of the holy places in Palestine, not the fate of the Ottoman dynasty. The villa on Madeira stands today as a museum. Tourists pay a few euros to see the room where Karl died. The iron bed is there. The crucifix is there. The photographs of the children are on the walls. Zita outlived Karl by 67 years. She never returned to Austria until 1982, when the government finally permitted her entry. On the condition that she renounce all claims to the throne. She refused to renounce anything. She entered on a technicality. She died in Zizzers, Switzerland, on the 14th of March 1989 at 96 years old. Her funeral in Vienna was the finest Habsburg spectacle since the burial of Emperor Franz Joseph in 1916. Complete with the traditional Capuchin crypt door knocking ceremony, in which the herald announces the deceased by their full titles, is refused entry, announces them again with fewer titles, is refused again, and finally says simply, "A poor, sinful mortal." The doors open. On the 3rd of October 2004, Pope John Paul II stood before 50,000 people in St. Peter's Square and declared Karl I of Austria blessed at the last step before sainthood. The miracle was recognised. A Polish nun healed of debilitating varicose ulcers after praying to Karl. His feast day was set for the 21st of October, not the date of his death, but of his wedding to Zita, a signal that the Church may one day honour both. Zita's own cause for beatification was opened in 2009. She is now designated a servant of God. The Vatican's theological long game is visible in its purest form here. If it could not save the Habsburg throne in the temporal world, it would elevate the last Habsburg emperor in eternity. Beatification accomplishes what no concordat could. It declares that the political failure of Catholic monarchy was not a spiritual failure, and that the Church remembers its own on its own timeline. Archduke Eduard Habsburg Lothringen, Karl's great-grandson, served as Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See from 2015 to 2025. Habsburg sat at the Vatican's diplomatic table again, not as emperor but as envoy. The privilège du blanc, the right to wear white in the Pope's presence, remains held by 7 women, including Princess Marina of Savoy, a descendant of the very dynasty that conquered the Papal States in 1870. The Vatican extends this honour to a Savoy, the institution that spent 59 years calling itself a prisoner of the Savoy monarchy, now welcomes a Savoy princess in white. Karl I lies in a modest tomb in Funchal. Fresh flowers appear on the grave, placed by people who believe the Vatican will finish what it started. Not a restoration, but a canonization. The concordats are still in force. The Reichskonkordat of 1933 remains valid in Germany. The Lateran Treaty of 1929 still governs Vatican City. The crowns fell, the concordats endured, the Church endured. In Funchal, the wind comes off the Atlantic and passes through the garden of the Quinta do Monte, where a 34-year-old emperor died trusting the institution that had blessed his family for 5 centuries. That institution wept for him. Then it signed the next concordat. Then the next. Then the next. The longest game ever played doesn't end with thrones, it ends with altars.